Welcome. Hopefully you're in the webinar that you signed up for. This is one of our July Lunch with LifeCourse sessions. Today, we're going to be talking about integrated support options. And this series is presented through the Family Resource Network of Ohio, and funding for the effort was provided by the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. So just want to thank folks at both of those agencies for their ongoing support of charting life coursework in Ohio. My name is Jenna Allen. I'll be presenting today. I work at Ocali in the Lifespan Transition Center, transition to adulthood consultant. So primarily work around supports for people and family in the transition space, but also a bit across the lifespan as well. And I've been a Charting the Life Course ambassador for about 1.5 years. And my phone number and my email are listed here. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime after today's webinar if you have questions or need a little bit of help working through resources and such. So I want to start, just as we usually do, with a little bit of overview about Charting Life Course for those who might not be fully familiar. The Trinity Life Course framework was created by people with disabilities and their families, really as a positive alternative to some of the other types of planning systems that we've typically used. And this is really founded on the principle that all people have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations in their community, just like everybody else. And really at its heart, Charting Life Course is about having different conversations. So these are conversations that are about what's possible, where we can identify new opportunities and supports for people. Really critically, these are conversations that we have with and as a family or a team. We recognize that none of us go through life on our own. We're all parts of families, friendship groups. We have valuable relationships that wrap around us. And it's important to consider those when we're thinking about our own lives. These are conversations that can reflect on past experiences to help inform next steps. It's really important to value the experience and the knowledge that people bring with them through life, and to honor the things that they've learned about themselves and about how that impacts their life vision. And really critically, these are conversations about possibility, not disability. So I mentioned that the Charting the Life Course framework is a positive lens to look at a person and their life aspirations. And there's space within the tools and within the framework to acknowledge barriers and challenges, but ultimately it's about valuing and empowering people. So again, today we're going to talk specifically about the Exploring Life Possibilities guide. And you should have that available as a handout if you registered in advance for today's webinar. But you can also get it from the Charting the Life course website. So feel free to go there if you lose your original copy, or if you ever want to direct others to the resource. When you go to LifeCourseTools.com and click in the library menu, you just go down to the integrated support star option. Usually it just takes a little second to load up, but once it does, you'll be taken to a page that has all of the integrated support star resources, so well beyond what we'll talk about today, but there's some other good stuff there to potentially explore. Once you scroll down past the tools and the informational videos, towards the bottom of the page in the additional support star resources section, that's where you'll find this link to today's resource that you can download into PDF format. So before we dive straight into the guide that we'll be talking about today, I do want to talk just a little bit about some other elements within the Life Course framework that you may or may not be familiar with, because they directly tie into the way that the guide is organized. So first, want to talk about the life domains. There's 6 of them, and these are a critical part of the framework in that they recognize that we have a lot of areas of our lives that are important to us and that make up a good, whole life for us, and that we need to think about all of those things as we plan for ourselves and help others plan for themselves. So just kind of briefly, the 6 domains are daily life and employment. These would be things like where do I work or volunteer? What other important routines do I have? Community living, where do I live? Both in terms of, do I have a house? Do I live in an apartment? Do I live with others or on my own? What kind of neighborhood do I live in? How do I navigate my neighborhood? Social and spirituality covers friendships, other types of valued relationships, as well as the relationships we have with our faith communities. I always think of healthy living and safety and security kind of going together a little bit. Most of us have at least some concerns about our health, the things that we do to keep ourselves well and feeling well, but then also the things that we do to stay safe and secure. So, having plans for emergencies and having access to services that can help us in the event of an emergency. And lastly, advocacy and engagement. So this is all the way from just kind of personal advocacy and engagement, being an active part of planning my life and advocating for myself and having my views respected and valued, but also potentially taking on positions of leadership or responsibility. So in addition to the life domains, the other important element of the framework that ties into the Integrated Supports Options Guide are the parts of the Integrated Support Star. So this idea lays out, kind of 5 key ways that most of us navigate through our lives and have support for ourselves as we go through life. First, our personal strengths and assets. These are our skills and abilities, the strengths, knowledge, and experience that we bring with us. But it can also involve tangible resources. So things that I have access to that can help me live the life that I choose. And it's really important to start with our personal strengths and assets. I think especially for people that experience a lot of challenges, this is an area that can get forgotten or overlooked sometimes in planning conversations. So by intentionally starting there, we're making sure that we're valuing what each person personally brings to the table. The next key part of the STAR are relationships. These would be both formal and informal relationships. So some of our relationships have, a formality or a legal component to them. I think of things like, certain familial relationships or guardianship, but it can also include family that are a little bit more distant, friends, and acquaintances too. So when we're thinking about relationships, I also think it's really important not to just limit ourselves to people who are kind of in that first circle of familiarity around us, but to also think a little further out. Who are my friends, my acquaintances, my coworkers, other people who could potentially be key to supporting me for the life that I choose. Technology is a support that most of us use. I feel like more and more all the time. This includes personal and consumer electronics like our smartphones or tablets or computers. Can also be things like home assistants, so Alexa or Google Home or your Ring doorbell. Can also include specialized equipment or software that you might have access to based on certain needs that you have. And then there's our community. These are the places and the resources that are available to all of us. So places like businesses, parks, libraries, churches, mosques. These are also the local services that are available to all of us. So things like our emergency services or public schools. Community-based resources are incredibly diverse. This is a big category. And it's important to know what's available both, locally, and then also things that you might access through remote communities too. Then lastly, we think about eligibility specific resources. And just like I mentioned, personal strengths and assets first, I mentioned eligibility specific resources last. Because again, sometimes we have this sort of upside down approach to planning when we're talking about people who have high support needs. We go straight to eligibility specific resources without thinking about all of the other ways that somebody might be able to have the support that they need. So eligibility specific resources, these are things that somebody might have access to through their diagnosis or their disabilities, something like a Medicaid waiver or access to OOD services. But it can also be members only resources, something like your private insurance plan. Um, some people have other types of status like veterans that they may have access to. So these are incredibly important and they will make up critical support for a lot of us, but we don't want to just get stuck in thinking about what we're limited to with what we're eligible for when we have such access to all these other rich sources of support. So this gets us to our integrated supports options guide, which is the main part of today's webinar. This is what you came for. This is a pretty information rich resource. So we're not going to just read through the whole thing. I would highly encourage you to look this over in your own time after today's webinar. But most importantly, in a minute, we'll talk about how you can integrate this into your work and use it as an ongoing resource, which is where the good stuff really comes out. But this guide was really supported to help people think more about the possibilities for support in their lives. So it's organized with those 5 integrated supports categories across the top: personal strengths and assets, relationships, technology, community-based resources, and eligibility-specific resources. And then each of the 6 life domains along the left side. So when you're using this guide, it always helps to start with a particular question or a purpose in mind. It can be useful, I think, just for sort of general browsing and creating ideas, but more typically when you're using this guide, you would be coming to it with a question or a challenge in mind. So for instance, kind of going across that first row, maybe if I'm thinking about an upcoming life change that is going to affect where I live or how I live, this guide can help me, kind of think about, okay, here's some initial ideas that I have about what I want for my new situation. How can I be supported to have what I want? So for instance, I mentioned I work a lot with transition youth. So of course, kids when they're in high school, they are thinking a lot about adult life and, am I going to live with my family forever or would I maybe like to live on my own? So for someone who's, for instance, thinking like, yeah, I think I would like to have my own place in the community, kind of starting with I'd like to live on my own. Maybe I'd like to have a roommate. Okay, what other types of supports do I need to be healthy and safe, to have the life that I choose? And as I'm saying all of that, you're probably already getting the idea that all of these things kind of intersect a little bit. So, you don't feel like you're just going to get all of your answers in one row a lot of times too. All of these life domains bump up against each other. So when we're planning, this is where this tool can help so much with thinking about what are all the resources that I could potentially pull from to live that life that I choose. So similarly, this kind of covers the first couple of rows. With community living, with social and spirituality goals, we can use this guide to take that part of the person's vision and then expand it out to see how to make it possible, to see how they need to connect to other things. I particularly like the healthy living and the safety secure and security parts of this resource guide. There are so many good suggestions in the personal strengths and assets area within this guide. And I think this is, these are some domains where we very particularly traditionally have relied so much on eligibility specific supports for people. We just go straight there when we're thinking about healthy living and safety and security. So while there's certainly resources across all of the categories that are represented on this guide, I love that personal strengths and assets have the most. And realistically, I think that's how most of us approach our health and our safety and security, especially healthy living. It can be a fairly sensitive topic for a lot of us. So I think, by thinking about how we can empower people and have them take more ownership and be more active in managing their own health, we're probably also going to help people have better health outcomes because the buy-in is going to be stronger and they're going to be doing things in a way that works for them. Whereas, having something like an eligibility specific support, I'll be the first one to say, I don't always follow all of my doctor's recommendations. So I need to find things that work for me that I can believe in and that I can do on my own. So these are just some examples of, just start thinking about what are some situations, what are some challenges where maybe we're not accessing all of the types of support that are available to us or the ones that are the right fit for us. And then lastly, the guide also has some resources for supports for the family. Again, we don't go through our lives on our own. And in many cases, our families are a huge source of support for us. And when I think about family in context of LifeCourse, I'm always thinking about it very broadly too. I'm thinking about, of course, people who are formally your family, but your chosen family too, your people. We all have those people who are just so important to us in our lives. And ideally, I think, we have these relationships where we can offer each other some mutual support. But especially if you find yourself in any kind of a caregiving role, having supports for you is really important too. So the resource also kind of looks at these life domains and these integrated support star categories through that lens too. How do we support the people that support us? What do they need to also have a rich, full, good life? And lastly, there's a special row for supports and services in general. And this is where I always think of this tool as getting a little meta. It kind of gets into the idea of how do you find services and supports for yourself? Well, one way is by using this guide. This is a way that we can help people be more active in their own self-advocacy and exploring their own options. But it also is sort of a space that lists some resources that might be useful across various domains and in various scenarios. So for instance, like in the technology category, a smart home can help you really with so many of these various life domains. So really approaching things like technology as a resource in a very person-centered way and thinking about what am I trying to achieve? What's the purpose of this? And then how do I develop that support resource to best fit my situation? So again, this isn't really meant to be a resource that you just sit and read. It's really meant to be used as you're exploring and planning through situations. So sometimes that I've used the resource and that you might find helpful are when you want to brainstorm possibilities. And especially when you're stuck and you want to brainstorm possibilities. Sometimes when you're thinking about how to address a challenge or a barrier or take a next step forward, you could just kind of come up a little bit short in terms of ideas. So this resource can help you think about new things that hadn't initially occurred to you, and then also kind of help move the conversation forward and get you unstuck. It can also be really helpful when you just want to get somebody thinking about something, get some wheels turning, or as my colleague Celia says, when you want to guide from the side, when maybe somebody is not quite ready for the next step, or they're just still, need some time to think things over. This is going to be a real helpful resource to ask questions like, well, have you thought about, or what would you think about? Maybe we could try this, those kinds of things. And these two are definitely very connected. So when you want to support independence, which is something that we talk about a lot, but especially interdependence, those are those relationships I mentioned where we mutually support each other. I help you, you help me. I think especially within our families, those relationships are incredibly important. And then also when you want to reflect on what might have been missed, even if you've had a really fruitful brainstorming session, come up with a lot of ideas. Sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. So having a resource to call on to be able to say, you know what, I don't even know a lot about this, but this sounds really interesting. Let's find out more about this potential area of support. So I like it a lot for all of these different situations. And then some questions that I like to encourage people to think about as they use the resource and just generally as they're exploring and planning. First and foremost, how do other people in my community do this or do that? You might also think about this as just how do other people who are like me in a certain way? How do other people in my community do their grocery shopping? How do other people in my community meet people and make friends? This kind of gets us, out of that disability specific or eligibility specific mindset and back into everybody else, has similar needs too. How are they meeting their needs? Where do they go? Who do they call on? What's currently working well for me? What might I like to change? These are good reflection questions for us to be asking ourselves and others as we move through life. I think that, it's really important to be open to change, but at the same time, if something's working really well, there's that well-worn saying about if it's not broke, don't fix it. And we say that for a reason. Sometimes you've already got what you need. So this can kind of help us to narrow in and focus in on what are we really looking at here. In a similar vein, what are my top priorities for the present and for the future? We can't equally prioritize all the parts of our life all the time. We'd go crazy if we tried to. So these are important questions to also think about as we're thinking about how to help support people plan and explore. How can others support me to explore options and try new things? So this really kind of gets at, maybe there are people within your circle of support that you haven't called on for certain needs, or who might like to expand their role and help you explore and try new things. But then also thinking about who else can help you. Maybe you haven't met your best friend yet. Maybe you want to expand your circle of friends, family, acquaintances that can support you. So thinking about how do you make those relationships? How do you meet those people? And then this is a really important one that we sometimes forget, but I think it's incredibly important to also think about what are you definitely not interested in? For those of you who are familiar with the LifeCourse trajectory tool, there are sort of two main categories on the right side of that tool. What do I want and what do I not want? And sometimes knowing what you don't want is easier than knowing what you do want. So you could potentially, for some barriers or challenges that people are facing where they really, really just don't know, you may find that you can kind of work backwards from that and say, okay, well, let's look at some options. And you can say, maybe, or no way. quoting several of my colleagues in today's presentation, but Barb Safaris, she shared a great tool with me recently. And it's, asks you to kind of look at, what's a right on and what's a no way. I loved that. I thought it was a great way to kind of help narrow down focus with folks. So you could certainly use this resource to help with that kind of conversation as well. And then lastly, I want to encourage you as you're having these conversations or as you're thinking about these things for yourself. It's always helpful to write things down or to record them in some way. Sometimes we feel like that's not an important thing to do, but it really is. Things get lost, things get misremembered, we forget to follow up on things. So 2 tools that I think are really helpful as you're thinking about where to write ideas down are the Integrated Support Star tool and the Life Domain Vision tool. And if you need any help with using these, they're really pretty straightforward, but the LifeCourseTools.com site has some good information about how to get started with these. And we've also done some previous Lunch with Life course sessions on these. So on the FRNO website, you can also download some short videos to walk you through using these tools. They're definitely not required. These aren't forms that anybody's going to require you to fill out. These are really for you and the people that you're supporting, just to keep those ideas organized and to help communicate ideas with other folks as well. So you see we're almost at the end of our time, but I want to thank you all for attending. This went really quick, but we do have a couple of minutes if anybody has any questions before we depart. And you can, if you do have questions, you can feel free to either just unmute yourself, or if you want to drop something in the chat, we can answer questions there.
I don't have a question. This is Melanie Live. I don't have a question, but it's so funny that the 2 things you were talking about, everything was awesome, but the 2 things you were talking about that caught my attention were finding out what people don't like, because I do supported employment with people, but I have found out you learn more almost from the bad spots, like I always tell people, it's like unraveling a sweater to that drop stitch. You figure out, I do a lot of math, like when I was in school, I tutored math and stuff. So you back up until you figure out where something went off the road and then you come back to it. So I love that. The other thing is that emphasis on the family, supporting the family. And I do this for a living, but I have an adult son who has autism and developmental disability, blind. And we did a lot of it on our own for years. Of course, he's 33. So 30 odd years ago, there were supports, but there weren't the same availability and level of supports. And it's very isolating for the family. And if you feel like nobody has your back and you shouldn't complain and talk about how isolating it is for you, and that it's normal to be frustrated with the system or with the child or with yourself, or your spouse or whatever. So I'll stop, but I just want to say that really hits home. And when you show somebody a form like that, it sort of validates those feelings, and saying, looking for support for you is incredibly important. I worked with an advocate, and I remember one point we were in a meeting and she said something about me, the supports that I needed as a single parent with this child with multiple disabilities. And I almost burst into tears, because I was like, really? I need supports? Yay. So, because I felt guilty. Like, why am I tired, or why am I? So now I'm kind of blithering, but I was going to say, I love everything about it. So, but thank you for sharing. Great presentation.
Oh, thank you. That's so good to hear. And yeah, I agree with you. I think, supporting families and caregivers is just so critically important. I think it's so beautiful the way that people will put others first, but it wears on you over time, and you need to take care of you too.
Well, it wears over time. And the thing that we learned with my son was, you're not setting them up for long-term success, because you're not letting other people, you're not building that network, right? And so you're actually kind of leaving them stranded. That's kind of what moved me, was I was like, wait, I'm being irresponsible by doing everything myself. I'm not building, I'm not building in those supports for when. So it was really helpful to say the responsible thing is to build this network, to let other people do things. So yeah, it's like I said, it's just really great. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I see Susan asked a question about where's the first form that you showed on the website. Maybe the easiest way, yeah, if you have the handout of the slides for today, I tried to do a little diagram on the website, but it's in the LifeCourse library and then in the integrated support star. Once you click through those two options, you'll find it about, I want to say about 3/4 of the way down on that page. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for your time. I always enjoy spending time with you guys in this space. You can join us for next week. We'll have a session next week on starter stars. So hopefully we'll see you there.